I guess we can start not by necessarily like reiterating and retreading what you talked about in that video, but sort of talking about what your experiences have been both before and after that videos come out, as far as being a person with bipolar 2 and seeing that on social, like that, the depictions and conversations about that condition on social media, and like how you feel when you see it and like your place in that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I to be honest, I hadn't seen too much like discourse about bipolar people on the internet. It's almost like a from a lack of representation of people talking about it. All of the same stereotypes about what bipolar is uh remain on my mind about like just on the internet or just in society at large, just like how, it's like, oh, crazy people that can't control themselves. It's like not that different from having, two different, like, multiple personalities or whatever, kind of older tropes about bipolar. And
Right.
I guess in just talking about it in the few like times that I have, because I don't really make it like I don't make main channel videos about it. I don't talk about it too consistently. I've mentioned it before, but even in just those few times that I've talked about it, it's been very positive, sort of from two ends. From one end of people that have it and relate to the experiences and like appreciate seeing that represented, and then from the other end of, I think, just generally having I'd like to think semi-normal person discussing it in a manner that's not stigmatized. And so I guess for me, it's been, in terms of like a before and after, I don't really see it that much. I was never exposed to too much like stigmatizing online discourse about it, but I know a lot of people, I think, are in a similar way where they don't see positive representations of it, and so that can leave them with what society leaves them, which is not usually a good um, place. It's not encouraging for people to like seek help or try to like learn about it and things like that. Um, and so yeah, it is, I think, good to just have more people on the opposite end of it.
Right, right. I think representation does play at least a big part in sort of the social aspect of understanding disorders. And it's interesting you talked about saying like a semi-normal person, like, and that sort of idea of normal and normativity, I think has such a huge part in even the conceptualizing of conditions and disorders like this. There's always discourse among disability activists and theorists about how much is socially constructed versus how much is like something that's observably almost like naturalist or natural. And for you, when it comes to that idea of being normal or not normal, has the diagnosis of having bipolar 2 and sort of your understanding of that, medicating and addressing that publicly, has that had some impact in your perception of yourself as being abnormal or normal? And does that have like a negative or positive impact on you? Is it a thing of like, I'm not the same as other people, but it's great? Or is it a thing of like, yeah, I'm different from other people and I feel like there's something wrong with me? Or maybe I feel normal and maybe I feel like other people think that there's something wrong with me, but I'm normal. Like, how do you sort the normativity aspect of that out?
I like that you seized on the use of the term normal, because I have been trying to use that word less, although it's like a part of my vocabulary, to like, just as like a something that's normal to me, where, or someone's being like a little weird, I say that's just not normal. You're not being normal, almost pejoratively. But you're 100% right that all of this normativity is constructed. And so even in labeling myself as what a normal like a person that seems normal, but they actually have bipolar, which is abnormal, that's sort of the implication. And that's definitely not like the direction I want to go. But 100%, like, you said something, just give me 1 second to think, because
Yeah.
I lose my train of thought sometimes. um I think about like Kanye recently, all the
Okay.
stuff that's been going on with him. I think that like you can see a world where socially we look at that, we see the obvious serious problems with what he's saying and say that's not normal, that's not what a normal person does. This person is suffering from mental illness along with other, obviously you can't explain it all away with mental illness, or with bipolar, um, but it doesn't always look like that. It doesn't always look like crazy heinous things. And um I think yeah, just being able to talk about how it, just because you feel like you're not normal doesn't mean. I'm losing my train of thought. My cat is at the door. Just give me
It's
one
okay.
second.
I have a cat here as well, but
Sorry about that.
that's okay. I know what it's like. I get this one
Oh,
over
kitty
here.
cat in the back. What's their name?
um, her name's technically like Princess Leia, but we call her like an assortment of things. Usually like Miss Meow or Mrs. Meow or
Nice.
something along those lines.
Very cute.
Um, don't feel too pressured to catch like the same train of thought. If there's something that you feel like you want to say in the moment too, or like you can move on, we can probably come back to it, you know.
Hmm.
It'll probably come about pretty well either way.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
I there was something I wanted to say about the normative thing, but if it comes back, I can
right.
I'll mention it.
Well, what I'll say on that, because I think sometimes we're also harsh on ourselves about our vocabulary, which maybe that's part of the way that we understand things being like online and how people usually sort out like thing bad, stop doing it. But when it comes to norms, like norms and normal stuff, it's a pretty inescapable like terminology, right? It's very useful to have a socially accepted construction that you can just say is normal, even if we understand also like of in two minds like that. On the other hand, there's also problems with just with what the norms are, right? And I guess what I'll ask is like if for you, um do you see it as something where I think I'll jump into like a big question now because like that's sort of we're sort of heading in that direction. But
Okay.
I think a lot of the struggle when it comes to mental disorders, some people will describe their disorder as disability, um, depending on the situation, and like obviously there's legislative aspects to that, but whatever the condition may be, there's a feeling of like, for instance, if you have bipolar, like that's a problem and now I have to medicate so that I can do right my job or like so that I can go to school. And then on the other hand, when we become critical and we try to become conscious of these things, we also realize that the job kind of sucks and like school sucks and like maybe not being good for those things is actually a good thing. And then we get in this uncomfortable place of like, am I trying to be normal? Is it bad that I am different in this way? And am I being, pathologized because I'm not fitting something that already sucks? So for you, like, do you feel like your path has been a trying to be normal, or is there what's your own sort of journey with it like as far as what you try to do with understanding your own condition?
Yeah, I that's such a good thing to bring up, that the way I view my value as a human operating society is heavily dictated upon things like the ability to output work, or the ability to find traditional success, or the ability to like do these things. And so for a lot of the time that in my bipolar phases that I've been depressed, so much of like what's important to me about that situation is getting myself fixed so that I can get back out and do stuff. And now obviously being depressed inhibits you from doing a lot of different things, not just working. But the main kind of value structure in my mind is I want to be successful at something, And if my depression is inhibiting me, then I need to get rid of that depression. And I mean, to think about it in the opposite end of like, oh, well, what if what if I'd prefer to just stay where I'm at, stay out of the pharmaceuticals, live how I want to live like as a human being, and reject the obvious pressures in society to um contribute, to the creation of capital, then yeah, I mean that's like, it's like in my mind a totally valid argument. Um, but the actual value systems are, it's hard to divorce yourself from that, especially if you're
Yeah.
someone who's like just starting to learn about diagnosis and starting to kind of recognize patterns. That it took me a very long time. It wasn't until like 5 years ago or so that I was diagnosed, and so like all growing up I had these different things going on and I didn't know. And so it's there's different like levels of understanding, and yeah, once you get to a place where you see that, oh, like once you finally make it to a stable mental health place, and then you go to hell every day, or just where, based like working for me, it felt like that. um I don't know, it's like, what is this really worth it? Is it really um the best thing, even though it might be the best thing as we conceive of it for society? It doesn't feel like it's that great.
Right. Like being able to fit well within your social environment is like really helpful. Um, like it's a very nice, fun thing, and it's helpful for doing a lot of things like, learning and making friends.
Yeah.
And when you have some sort of condition, whether or not it's something that you can see as severe or something that you can see as more subtle, and it stops you from feeling like you can fit in that, like it makes you they go through these phases or go through these situations, these mood swings that make you feel unable to even have that, then it's like you have to make a decision. And I think that that's what real agency is like, not necessarily that you're going to have your life the way that it's supposed to be in your mind as you imagine it perfectly, but that you recognize what your situation is and you recognize what choices you have, and then you make the choice that you feel most comfortable with. um and for you, you're in the process of you're a YouTuber, right? And you're also willing to experiment with different things as far as doing different channels and trying different types of content out, or trying even just different aesthetic or ideas in your videos. And how has the process been for you as you've gone through these different struggles, um with your mental health, and these different struggles with like staying consistent or staying like productive? Where are you at now in terms of like where you may choose to like experiment or choose to like try something else, and where you decide I'm just going to do the simple thing that works because I want that?
Yeah, I that's a constant balance. Like
Yeah.
the anchor sort of is just having a main channel where I'm in the commentary space, so it's much less, I think I feel a lot less pressured. And over time I've kind of like divorced myself from the stricter elements of content, of like really good essays. Like I love video essays. I watch a lot of them. I'm super like my favorite type of content to watch is video essays. But for me, I don't know if I can like produce one of those like consistently, let alone like once a month or every few weeks. Like some of the people I watch, I'm like, oh my god, that's incredible. But so
Right.
commentary is much sort of uh more of a stable thing, and then with that I can use that as sort of like a place to grow and a place to experiment, but also keep with kind of the entertainment focused stuff. And then yeah, like I've been doing a couple different things. Like I have a second channel, and then I started a blog channel, and I have a couple other ideas for different channels. And the thing is, being able to do all that is awesome, but I think without the main thing that I have, without having found success on a channel to where I am like stable
Mhm.
financially, I wouldn't really, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to do all these different things.
Yeah.
Or I would do all these different things and not find success in any of them, because that when you're balancing a bunch of plates, you can't, it's really hard to like figure out what works and then grow or whatever. And so if you combine that with like being you know, manic depressive, where you'll be manic and start all these new ventures, and then you're depressed for, a month or two, and everything just fizzles away into dust, and then you're manic again, and you're like, let's do something else. And it's like
Right.
a really hard to get going and stay consistent. And so, yeah, I mean, to be honest, like, one of the things that's helped me with consistency a lot lately is just like having deadlines that aren't really even imposed by me. It's like I got management recently, and I do sponsors, and so like I kind of bare minimum, like, if I have a sponsor due during a month, I'll do that. But other than that, the rest of the time is spent kind of trying to like learn, which is very, it's very obviously a lucky position to be in. Um, but just having that consistent place to like
Yeah.
return to of something simple, it makes it very freeing. But again, like, to balance that with diagnosis and like starting out, it's just it's a lot. It is definitely,
Yeah.
to get to be where I am, I feel super lucky. um but it is, yeah, it's just, it's tough for sure
Yeah.
getting.
Yeah. I mean, of course it's tough. When you were building the channel, that's, you're at 10K, 30K, and you're doing these videos. Did it feel that way then, where it was like, oh, this is a consistent thing that I'm going to put consistent effort into? Or was it still a process of like, I really don't know what's going on, but it's building, so let me figure it out kind of thing?
There was a certain point where I decided that I was just going to do YouTube, and from then, like, it was May of 2021, and it was kind of like my initial goal was just do a video a week, and then they took longer, so I took more time, but I was still just actively working towards it. But there was such a long period of my life before that where I had some vague idea that I wanted to do this thing. I had a channel, I had uploaded different videos and done like commentary style stuff, but like once every 6 months, or like
Right.
once every year, I'd put something out and make something. I was also freelancing, doing like video editing and music videos and different sort of random small projects, and trying different things. And um I kind of just randomly decided that I was going to try it. And then after that, like, as I started growing, like at 5K, 10K, what drove me to keep going was just the experimentation of trying something, seeing how it does, um, seeing how it feels, seeing how the end product, like seeing how, when you watch that final edit back, how it feels compared to the last one, how you feel like your style is improving.
Yeah.
And then just, eventually something sticks on, where, okay, I think it was probably the video I did where I like talked about a bunch of other left-leaning YouTubers. I
Yeah.
made this like sort of guide to like breadtube
I
space.
remember when that
And
dropped. That was a big moment. That was
yeah, it
everybody
was,
was like, "Whoa, who's this?"
yeah, it was really kind of like random. I mean, I figured it would do well, but also it was still like, it was cool to see, like, have a concept, do it, and then see it all play out kind of how I pictured it. And that wasn't until after, months of experimenting and learning different things. And so it it kind of, it's a slow snowball of building. But it sounds so like self-helpy, but just the first thing for me was just like saying, okay, I'm if I want to do this, you just gotta upload something. It can be like, you doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, it will
Yeah.
be pretty shitty early on, but um it is kind of an empowering thing to look back on, how, I'm sure you probably, anyone who does YouTube feels that way, that like
Yeah.
how much you've grown over the time that you've been creating.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something really liberating about allowing yourself to suck. Like, it was a big part of, I think one of the things that really tortures people who are creative, is that there's this, and basically everybody, is that there's this duality of like, I want it to be this way, but I also recognize the situation and know that this is effective. Like, I also recognize like I would succeed if I did this, but I also want to do this, but I also want to do this. And usually there's like these really heavy things of like, especially for leftist YouTubers, the classic dynamic of like, well, I want to get views and like build a career for myself, but I also don't want to be a capitalist. I don't want to be, utilizing these ideas for capital, and I also don't want to be just chasing views. I want to put out something that's going to really impact people. I want to put out something that has some sort of revolutionary potential, right? And these things are basically irreconcilable. Like you basically can't have both. And I think what a lot of leftist YouTubers do is say, well, I think I would like to make this a career, so I'm going to focus on doing something that will be stable for my career while continuing to find ways to nurture these other things outside of the work or in little places in the work. And when that boundary doesn't get set, it becomes extremely almost, like it's arresting. It's like you can't do anything because you're like, I can't make a decision because it will be on one side of this and I won't be able to have both. And then some people will decide, well, I don't want to make this my career. I'm just going to wait every few months or so, work on something over time, and then put it out, not even worry about profiting off of it. And that's also very valid. And then they just figure out something else that works for them, right? But there is a way, even though it feels very self-helpy, which is something that is its own fun bag of things. There's a way that you can make something work for yourself in the sense of like, I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this being my situation, you know? Um,
Yeah, there
yeah, keep
just to
going.
add on to that, like there is I remember early on the thing of like, okay, I'm super into leftist politics. Um, I wasn't an activist. I wasn't someone who was like reading a whole lot of theory, but I was very into a lot of these ideas and the idea, the pathway of thinking like, okay, I just learned about this. You know, more people need to understand and learn about this, so I'll just grow a bunch, and as I grow, spread these ideas, and that will be what leftism is. And then eventually you kind of realize, oh, like actually you kind of need to either separate these things or, like you said, like work them into one another. um but also that, that's not how politics works in some sense. Like ultimately we are putting out a product, and even if that product is educational and entertaining, or even if it's educational and liberating and like organizing, like a lot of people do, fundraising streams
Yeah.
or get people to go out and do things, and there's like a spectrum from like YouTuber to activist that I think there's good people all over that spectrum. The issue arises when people are in this place and the other place wants them to not do that. Like when someone is really big on YouTube and they're not being good enough of a leftist, or when someone is really hardcore like leftist. No one really gets mad at people at leftist for being bad at YouTube, but it's more so like the resentment from like the successful YouTuber crowd of the online left, and how we conceptualize like online left communities that are like fighting for whatever things that are important to them. They're like, oh, they're so hypercritical. They won't let anyone be
Mm-hmm.
just an entertainer. You have to like tread lightly along these things. And so there's kind of this back and forth thing, but eventually, yeah, like I said, I've just been trying to like be more chill and just not um just for my own mental health, just like focus on things that are fun to make. But that kind of radical edge, you can see it in a lot of people that are starting out, um and yeah, I think like it's just something you just learn as you go on. But yeah, I just want to add that. So
Yeah, no, it's 100%. And the struggle I think that comes to people that struggle with their audiences and that like maybe get into drama, if to use a, crude phrase, is like people who don't feel comfortable with their place in that. Like people who are the YouTuber and who are on this, like doing this particular thing, but maybe in their head they don't think that that's what they're doing, or maybe in their head they're like, they want to be also doing this other thing. And it's like, if that's not your role, which, it's tough sometimes to like classify ourselves as like, this is my role. But if something's not your role, then there's really very little benefit usually to like trying to step into a different role and be like, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And then also expect a specific reaction. Like you can do it, but you also have to know where you're coming from on that.
mm-hmm.
Even if you think you have the best take on like K-pop or something, if that's not really the thing that you do and you don't really know that much, right? And you haven't really situated yourself in that space, then usually it becomes very like, not only does it become kind of problematic sometimes, but it becomes unproductive generally with all these things. Um, I do want to pivot a bit before we talk more about lefty stuff, but I was curious when, like, do you remember when you started having people following your channel who like knew you and like were like talking to you in a very sort of not even necessarily familial, but like this parasocial way? Like, do you remember when you started getting people who like showed up to your streams and like were like regulars and like showed you a lot of praise and like showed up in your comment sections? And how did that feel for you?
I mean, it feels great, you know. It does. Nice comments and people that say they like you on the internet. It's a great feeling. Um, I think like probably, I mean, there's a few people that I remember seeing comments like early on, when I was just like starting out on those videos in like May of 2021, where they're like, "Oh, this was really cool. Like you're super underrated. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
surprised more people don't know about you." I'm sure you get that a ton. I mean, that's what I said when I saw your videos. I was like, "What the fuck? Why does this? This is like really really good." Um,
Thanks.
but it's nice. And I think, I mean, for so long, like even before starting, and I'm sure just people that use social media feel this way. Like it's designed specifically to make you like when that happens. Like
Yeah.
whether it's likes, views, or comments, positive comments. Um, whether it's like your mom posting a Facebook status and getting a couple likes, or I don't know how into likes moms are, but I know people generally are into likes. It's like designed to make you like it. So, there's that element, but there's also like kind of a community element that is cool, which is people sort of sticking with you and seeing how things change over time. I think like that is interesting. I'm like really bad on the parasociality de- conversation because I just don't think about it that much.
Hmm.
I feel like I'll reply to comments and stuff, and I do view it as more of a community, but like I've seen so much stuff on parasociality, like different videos and different like constructs of and ways of thinking about it, that I just come all the way to the end as being neutral and just not thinking about it. Super anti-intellectual. That's my most anti-intellectual stance is on parasociality. But
Well, I don't know if
yeah, I
that's
don't know.
anti-intellectual. I mean, to be neutral or to just be like chill about it, that doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
you're not thinking, you don't have like complex thoughts or knowledge about it. It just means that you don't really come down super hard one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that that's generally pretty healthy of a way to do it, because I don't really see a lot of benefit in being the like these parasocial relationships are ruining the world guy. But I also think it's important to be critical of the parasocial relationships when they happen, like as far as like thinking about them critically. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I asked because I think that that is um a great part of what brings the confusion as well, especially when you have your own sort of mental battles to fight, with regards to mental health is, um, and also with other creators. You see this dynamic where a creator is like, for instance, they'll say something, they'll get called out, and then they won't handle the sort of accountability part well, or these kinds of things. When we're on these journeys, right, to learning about our own mental health and mental conditions, and we see creators who are talking about it, those creators kind of become ways through which we understand those things and understand them with ourselves. And I think, the thing that we've been talking about consistently on our channel with these past few videos has been TikTok and how people have been understanding diagnosis and their own mental conditions or potentially having conditions through TikTok and through TikTokers, and people feeling extremely uncomfortable in different ways about it. So for you, when you and we sort of talked about how you stepped into like try to offer a different representation when it comes to being bipolar. When it comes to what you see on social media about mental health and mental conditions, do you feel optimistic about it in the sense of like, wow, this is a lot of people that are, that have these their own communities and then are getting help? Or are you concerned in the sense of like, well, maybe these people are not quite learning them, like maybe they're overdiagnosing, or they're getting like they're construing things in a way that's not as serious as it needs to be when it comes to this.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of like highly critical spaces towards like over self-diagnosing, or people on TikTok that just like make stuff up, or
Right.
people that are like faking, uh disabilities or different diagnoses to like not to try and like grow online, but also for various other reasons. And I mean, those are obviously like very important critiques, but I think ultimately what can um what can be salvaged from that, or what can grow from that, is a higher prevalence of conversations about mental health, and then having people that know what they're talking about, and educators and people, um just getting that content and getting those spaces developed to where you have actually sort of um people you can go to online that are reputable, and that have like some sort of experience in the realm, or even just various representations of people that make content and talk about mental health in it occasionally, or they talk about how they have uh some type of mental disorder, and that um factors into how you view them and things. But
Yeah.
I think mainly the prevalence of the conversations is um what's the word? It's like it's good to see, like it's positive, but I try not to take too seriously the like hypercritical stuff. But I get that there's valid concerns if like you're a parent, and you see a trend on TikTok where I don't even remember like the last one, but it's the types of things that it's just like, oh, that's probably not super great, and that's probably you know the overexposure to, it's probably more so a product of exposure to social media and platform factors that makes that. But it's still nonetheless important to sort of nail down and understand why, like, we don't want people doing that necessarily, or we having content that's critical of that is important, having like a kind of dialectical nature.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, yeah, it's yeah.
And the messiness is kind of, it's kind of unavoidable, and it kind of has to happen. Like, I talked about sort of my experience with probably having ADHD, and like I've never gotten formal diagnosis, so I'm always couching language a little bit. But that process of sort of realizing, well, there's something about me, right? Like, well, I know that there's something here going on. Um, that in and of itself is very important. But I think people like to think that you go from there to like the really ideal second step, and then the really ideal third step. And what happens actually is that you spend a lot of time considering different possibilities, and it never really finishes. Like, there's never really a point where you're like, I've been fully diagnosed for everything, or like I'm fully comfortable with my diagnosis and my status right now. It changes regularly, and it's a process that is what causes the learning, because you can't really have that curiosity to learn without feeling like there's something that you want to know, or something that you need to know. When you were in the process of understanding your own condition, um, how long did it really take you before you were like, let me get a diagnosis? And did you really feel like that made a huge chapter turning difference in your life, where it was like, now I know? Or are you still in the process of like, like I'm still a little bit curious about this, like, diagnosis and what it means, and if there's something more here?
I I think like there was a page turning thing for me. It felt that way for me with bipolar, because leading up to my diagnosis, I was having kind of more manic episodes and more just hyperactivity and more instability. It was sort of like like a building ups and downs to a point. Um, Similarly, like looking back on my life, I was able to kind of pinpoint retroactively where that had been manifesting always growing up. So discovering that, and then like mood stabilizers and psych, just going to, you know, therapy and things like that, um were super important. However, I think the curiosity remains for me, because like I felt so much better with that, but there are other ways that I am like interested in learning about, and like I just it's I moved like a year ago, and I haven't had a psychiatrist where I've been, and it's been kind of a struggle to like find one, and I finally have an appointment. And ADHD is one of those things that I plan on talking to them about, because it's like there's parts of you that you think are just how you are, and then there's that curiosity of like, is this just how I am, or is this actually like a deficiency, that something that I can sort of, I guess deficiency isn't a great word, just like something that you're like, oh, I'm kind of struggling with this specific thing, which is different from the other things that
Right.
I was struggling with before. So can this be addressed, or is just how I am? And a lot of times, sometimes it's just, you know, you have a quirk, and that's totally fine. But also, I mean, I do think like the education and understanding about um just the different types of things, the different types of traits that you may display, and then, you know, learning about it, I don't think it can ever really hurt, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like for me, ADHD is one of those things where when I notice I like am needing to do a lot, or needing to sort of do things that I'd never done before, like write video essays,
Right.
I really struggle with it. And I don't know, there's kind of a part of my mind that's like, oh, if I just go and get diagnosed, then I'll be able to do that thing. That might not be the case, but it still drives me to want to learn about it, and if that's possible, or if there's just something that I need to, you know, work on with my approach that will make it work, and going through a professional to have that conversation first, I think is good. But yeah, like I said, education is always good, you know.
Yeah, of course. When you were in that period before your diagnosis and you were having the um more periods of mania, more periods of hyperactiveness, um, did you in your mind at that time think I might be bipolar, or was it just like I don't know what's going on, or I don't know if something is going on?
Yeah, it was that I just don't know. Like I you don't even know that you don't know. You're not
Right.
thinking at it from that. You're thinking at it from inside of the, you know, inside of the experience, as opposed to like detaching yourself from it and viewing your actions in an objective manner.
Right.
Um, I don't even. I'm trying to think like when I. It might have been at my first appointment where I learned what bipolar was, or something. Yeah, probably like really, really, really late on to actually experiencing it. And um that definitely, it's a weird feeling, because it's like, oh, like I was saying, like this isn't, you know, just who I am. This is something that's actually going on with me sort of mentally. Um and that's kind of liberating to learn that, but also um uncomfortable, because then it's like, well, if this isn't me, then why is it me? If it isn't
Right.
me, then why am I going through it? And what about my experience um dictates the need for that problem to be addressed? I don't know if that
Right.
made much sense, but yeah.
It makes sense. I think I mean it's like a really shitty thing to like go through because and people talk about this a lot. It's this thing where you're like, well, I just thought I was really like a really shitty person. Like I just thought I was like a jerk and or like I was just super I didn't care enough about my friends. I didn't care enough about the people around me or about school or things like this. And what conditions offer, which in a sense you also have to be careful about, but it offers a thing you can point at and say, oh, well, I just had this. And then people around you go, oh, like he just had this. Like, and it becomes this pretty easy shorthand for communicating that
Mm.
it's not that you were a bad person or that you're you know, deficient in some way. It's just that you had this struggle that people didn't understand. Um, but at the same time, there's also things that we recognize, like there is something of a personality that exists in us, right? And like everybody who's bipolar like doesn't have the same reaction to their condition. Everybody, there's people who are very nice in bipolar, there's people who are very mean, right? And there's something to where we're like also obviously very influenced and conditioned by our surroundings, by the conditions of our lives, right? So part of it was that for me, I recognized that I was just different and I had issues with school and attention. But part of it was also that, there was turbulence in my house. And part of it was also that school was terrible, right? Like school was a really terrible experience, generally. And that there was all this pressure that was being put on me when I wasn't really doing anything that wrong in the first place, right? Like it's not like I was, even if I was in this point where I was flunking out of all of my classes and getting kicked out of school, that's not because like I'm a shitty person, right? It's not just because like, well, either he has ADHD or he's just a bad kid. It's like, well, that's just a reaction, right? It's a response that's perfectly like a perfectly acceptable thing to happen to a person, and then it becomes that thing where again you're kind of like, I need to make a choice about what I want to do here because there's a valid path I can go down where I'm like not going to college, where I just go on this other path. But like, I would probably prefer to do this. I would prefer to have Adderall so that I can go work out and like have a pretty easy way to do this and not have to commit as much time to get myself in that mental state, right? Um, for you, what has being bipolar and having your formal diagnosis meant for you, even outside of like the very clear things of like I'm able to get medication, things like that. Like, what does it mean in your day-to-day experience?
I think a sense of like control, a sense of uh things being level, um and that has obviously many benefits, but there are some kind of drawbacks. The feeling of like pure manic creativity,
Mm-hmm.
where like I think back to when I was doing a lot of like visual arts and music videos. I remember some of what I feel like is my best work came after like being awake for 4 days and just going and buying like a, CRT TV and going in a garage and being obsessive about something,
Yeah.
about an effect that I want to recreate, or like just make something I've never seen before, and coming out on the other side with this thing that's like, this is like, I'm so proud of this and this is amazing. But the life you have to live, or the way you have to exist to build up to that thing, it's not worth it. I mean, it is worth it and it's not worth it. Like, it obviously is not sustainable, but um that's the part that I kind of sometimes miss. And sometimes will like think
Yeah.
about like when if I run out of medication, I'll be like, what if I just stopped taking them and then saw what happened, just to see, like, I don't know, because just wild shit happens when you're manic. And
Yeah.
so there's I think about that sometimes, but for the most part, uh I like being more ba- it just feels better for just health reasons, and
Yeah.
like human reasons of like, you know keeping up with my family and things like that. Like, I
Yeah.
feel like I'm able to maintain those connections more consistently, and with friends. Like, I'm still pretty bad at it. Like you saw when I on Twitter, I'm like really bad with messages, but I still like eventually get around to it, as opposed to before, a lot of the times where I just like, I'd have like a connection with like work or whatever, and then because I didn't follow through, it'd just be severed after like a certain amount of time. And that's kind of goes back to the self-worth thing of like, oh, I'm just like, I don't care if I lose friends for these reasons. But it's like, oh, I mean, you kind of don't even remember that they exist because the last time you texted them,
Right.
you were like dangling from the rooftop. So it's a whole back and forth. I forget the question that you asked, but
I mean, you basically answered the question. I think
okay, cool.
um there's because it's interesting because I think the maybe you could describe it as like a libertarian leftist sort of critical psychiatry approach is often to be like, these are social constructions. These are things we decided are disorders because these people don't fit into society properly. And maybe there's this conception of like the bipolar person after capitalism, or in a non-capitalist world, like in a better world or a utopian world, who does go like stay up for 3 days making a really cool movie, but then he gets to just like sleep afterwards and like catch up on it and like have this natural process. Whereas the one of most of the big problems, maybe, or at least a large amount of the big problems that happen when you're in that state, is that you can't pay your bills, like you can't show up to work, or you're not taking care of your room, or you're not taking care of your food needs. And a lot of them are money centered as well. Like I'm spending my money in places that I shouldn't be spending them, or I'm losing my money or whatever, and now I don't have an adequate amount of things to take care of my health. And I think that there's some merit to that, as well as some drawbacks to that, like oversimplification, because there is a point to where, yeah, like I do want to sleep 8 hours every night, wake up at a reasonable hour in the morning, talk to my friends, have a nice routine, take care of my responsibilities on a regular basis. And that's not just a social conditioning that I've been drilled into my brain. It's like healthy, right? Like it's been pretty scientifically proven to be a pretty nice, healthy way to go about it. And even if the other way is also healthy, if I did it right, or if I had the right conditions, I don't really know that. And there's a lot of ways that it could go wrong, and it's not as safe. Um, I think I'm interested in how your leftist politics sort of figure into it, because you talked about how you've been interested in those for a while, and obviously that was a foundation of what you built your channel on and how it became popular. Um, what were your influence? What was your beginnings into sort of being lefty, being on the right side of things,
Being woke.
coming to this side?
Yeah.
What was your what was your journey into that, and like um we'll just start there. What was your journey into that, and how did that progress over time?
Yeah, so I guess pre leftism, I was always like just kind of like my family was like libs, like Obama is dope libs, and
Okay.
politics weren't that sort of like at the forefront. I played sports in school, and like we just went camping and shit. Like it was weird, just like didn't ever talk about that stuff very seriously.
Right.
It was kind of like Bernie 2016 when I first like I think I started watching some YouTube, listening to some podcasts. I got following like left Twitter area people and just reading what um Twitter, not even books, just like reading
Okay.
what
Yeah.
people were saying in different communities, and eventually that leads you to um reading lists and things like that. And yeah, I like it. Uh, there was a time where I was like doing a lot of reading and like Marx, Lenin, different, like I had a few anarchists people, and like also a lot of like learning about like I think the big ones were like white supremacy, imperialism, patriarchy, the big system, like systems, just learning about systems and
Right.
being like, oh shit, this is kind of like this is wild, um and yeah, it's a lot. And in terms of how they figure into like what I'm doing or how I think about things, it's tough because part of me feels like there are people that are like really sort of well versed in that stuff and are able to communicate it in a super sort of digestible manner, or even if it's not digestible, just in a deep understanding manner that I'm not able to do.
Mm.
um so there is like that feeling of like imposter syndrome of like, okay, if I don't really understand something fully, I don't want to necessarily speak on it. um
Yeah.
but on the other hand, these are things that I do believe, and like they're things that I think about often, and um it's letting that imposter syndrome completely take over to where I'm not actually even applying any of the things that I know to my analysis. That's not ideal either. So It's kind of like a balancing thing for that. But yeah, just like watching things, reading things, and just trying to listen, like trying to listen as much as one can. And never, like, I'll always fall on the side of like believing some wild random crazy thing that's like a Twitter lefty with 10 followers says, as opposed to like pointing at it and being like, what the fuck is the left doing these days? Like, I'll always, if I have to fall on either side, I'll fall on that side, which it to a fault, obviously. But mostly it's just like, okay, like someone's saying something, let me try to understand it first. And be just because I feel like there's such a sort of, these systems run so deep, and there's so
Yeah.
there, you can't really just openly discount whenever people like incredulously sort of be like, oh wow, okay, the left has gone too far. I'm like, have they though? Like what are you specifically referencing? Because I don't know, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the case. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's always there's always like this meta discourse about the left. And sometimes there's a merit to that, but I do wish people would just like read the books more, like, and just be like, hey, well, let's talk about it and let's talk about where we disagree rather than being like in this finger pointing thing. Um, and I think that has, a lot of what has been central to what I'm working on, what we're working on with the YouTube videos about mental health under capitalism, is that fulcrum, that central point of like understanding like that we have this conception socially of mental health as like this other thing, kind of like we do with something like sports or something like nutrition or these things where it's like, well, this is like its own category and then there's politics, right? Whereas a lot of the reality is like your mental health is very much affected by politics, right? Like it's all affected by politics and sports. Like sports is very much politics and motion, and capital and motion. And if you don't have the access to the correct healthcare because of legislation in your area, because of reactionary politics that are very prevalent, then you don't get that kind of help that you need. And that causes a lot of issues. Or if you can't pay the rent on time, right? Like that is going to cause you anxiety, obviously. Um, for you, I think there's this duality and there's this beauty in like how you're able to talk about your being bipolar in itself and as its own topic. But I'm curious for you, what you've noticed about your leftist politics and what you see from a leftist, what you analyze as a bipolar person, like as a person who's bipolar, like how much of the things that you suffer from do you think are like totally unavoidable if politically things were just different? And like how much is it like that you're like how much left as far as politically um do you think is like this is okay, this is not just like this could be way better or really great in my life and not something that I feel a struggle with as a bipolar person if people just had like a good understanding of capitalism or if the politics was different here kind of thing.
Yeah,
I
this is
guess
a really good
disability
question.
issues is like the
Yeah,
question.
yeah, of like, if our society was structured in a kinder, more empathetic, and more sort of just way, um, would I feel the same drives and motivations to sort of address my bipolar? I don't know. That's like, it's a really good question, because it is like, obviously the dream is to get to that place where we're able to find an answer, where we're able to
Yeah.
say, okay, after two generations of living in this utopia, or in this, as utopian as it can be, where everyone has what they need because we can, because they should be able to, and they can, under an adequate restructuring. um what does how we define ourselves and our own experience of mental illness, or mental illness itself, what does that look like? And I just don't know. I don't know the answer, but it's that's kind of the question. I mean, do you have any like
Well,
ideas or is
um, there's a lot of interesting stuff. I today I was having this think part of why I'm asking. It's like today I had this thought of like, man, like if I wonder if like my grandkids or like my great grandkids or like that generation of people are gonna look back like in a history book at like our time and be like, oh my God, they all thought they had ADHD, but it was just like they just had like like what the hell is ADHD? Like I can't believe they called themselves that. Or they oh my God, they kept calling these people bipolar, but they were actually just like people with slightly different brains who were really struggling because life sucked, right?
mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the interesting thing of like having some sort of distance from your own time or creating that distance mentally to say like, oh, like what how much of this is something that I've concretized as like this is real, this is life, and is actually just like a wild condition of the way that we're living. And I think there's no really great way to be predictive and to answer that. But I guess what I am curious about is like what are the things like um that you see maybe like concrete things in your day-to-day life that you're like as a person who's bipolar this is unjust and we just accept it, you know,
Mm,
like this is something that is systematically harming me and this has to be changed.
yeah. Hmm. I think I guess to like to like go back just a little bit on what you were saying
Yeah.
was um like I think I despite like manic episodes and things, my sort of level of severity of the mental illness that I've dealt with um is at that space where to fall into diagnostic as a like response to capitalism, as a response to like productivity or whatever construct um one might define as being sort of a reaction to those systems. I think I'm in that sort of window of space where I'm not like a violent threat to the people around me or any by any
Mm-hmm.
means for things like that, like pre-diagnosis. And so um that space that looks at the world and says, um, okay, well, the world wants me to be this way, and like I should probably just try this drug or try to get diagnosed for this thing. Like I'm in that kind of zone. So I almost feel like I don't even, I'm not even really able to comment on on that, I guess.
Mm.
But let me think about that because you said regarding um the
Like
unjust
injustices, yeah.
di- direct injustices. It's just something that I can't even speak on, I don't think, because
Mm.
things like I feel like in a good place, which is
Right.
obviously good, but um
Well, like
yeah, go ahead.
maybe it's general things too. I mean, like
Mhm.
you know, if it is that I have ADHD or whatever, like there's definitely stuff that I look at. I think one of the big things is like school. I mean, we talked
Mhm.
about it a little bit, but like one of the formative things that made me that built sort of my politics as well as my journey towards understanding myself was that experience of being like I'm in school and I'm not doing well and people keep saying I have all this potential and I'm really smart but I don't care enough, but I know that that's not true. And also if I don't care enough, so what, this thing sucks anyway, like who cares about this, um and all these kind of feelings. And I think school is a place where people very much it's this context through which when you're young you're classified and you're very much outcasted, and it's also the place through which you build your understanding of the world. Like that's the place where you start seeing people categorized, you start being in competition and comparison with people, and you start noticing who gets the benefits, why, you know, why the rich kids seem to do well and go on to this place and why I have to struggle to go to college and not pay debt. um So maybe we can talk about that. Like, was your scholastic experience something that like you found was troubled, or was that something where you were like, yeah, it's kind of just like pretty much like a normal student, quote unquote, and only these issues sort of emerged in other places later on?
Yeah, with Scholastic, I always got like pretty good grades, but I kind of bullshitted a lot most of it. Like I was able to pull off grades by yet I didn't learn very much at all. Like I
Right.
learned the basics, but I didn't learn a whole lot. Um and I think probably having good grades is its own form of like I'm able to escape that sort of stigma or like negative feeling towards how I rank among other people because it is the hegemonic like ideal of
Yeah.
being good at school or whatever. But I mean, that story in itself tells a paints a not a great picture of that system because coming out on the other side with the quote unquote achievement and you didn't really learn anything, that's not great. You know,
Yeah.
you want to learn stuff. You want to feel like you spent your time well and like you are kind of a holistic having a holistic experience of education. But that's just not the case. And obviously for me the social factors weren't as prevalent for like school itself, but um just that the way that system's set up is itself a sort of detriment. But
Yeah.
there was something you said about God, I lost it. I'm losing all these trains of thoughts. I'll try
It's
and
it's
I'll
very
message you if I
nebulous.
remember
Like
anything.
it is
Mm-hmm.
very heady stuff, so it's understandable. And
Mm-hmm.
when we're not gonna go super much longer, I don't want to keep you too long, but
Okay.
um the thing the thing I think is um really interesting as like a theme of what you've been talking about is that it's like it feels like you have a very I don't want to say withdrawn, but more so sort of isolated experience of like understanding yourself and understanding the world around you, of like not feeling like you were in a place and like being forced out, but like that you always just kind of, and a lot of people do this. You always just kind of had your cocoon almost, and like when it was time to hand in a grade, it was like, okay, you came out of the cocoon and you hand in the paper and then you go back in, right? And like when it's time to do things, it's like you're there, but you're not really having like all of these sort of clashes with things around you. So a lot of the experiences that people typify as like this person's bipolar are like you were out somewhere, you were with people, or you were in school, and then you blow up on the teacher, and then there's this whole thing, or like you have this sort of emotional breakdown. Like these are the sorts of like canonized stories, and because it's very visible, like it's very easy to see like, this person's struggling, this person's having a thing, other people are having a thing with it, they don't know how to react, they're reacting poorly, etc., etc. Whereas and this is very sort of typical of like people who go online a lot, is that like a lot of people are on here online noticing these things about themselves, probably having mental conditions, thinking about that, because for most of their childhood, their response has just been to more so withdraw and like put themselves in like their own space. And like they knew also how to navigate in the space with other people. So if it was time to be, to do a presentation, you did a good presentation. And when it was time to hand an assignment, you were good. And you're fairly social and you knew how to dress okay, like these kinds of things. Like you met the social expectation, but you never felt like a part of it or connected to it either. You were just kind of like, I'm meeting the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's no real way that they can tell you, there's something wrong with you. But then at the same time, you were also often just in your cocoon and you had all these things going on in your head, but like there's nothing that you're like there's it takes a while before you're like, oh, this is actually a thing, like this is actually a problem, because it was more so that you were adept enough to adapt to your surroundings and make it out doing pretty well, even though there were some things that silently you were kind of battling with. um and that's sort of like, I don't know, I'm not trying to like psychotherapy, like that's not my thing, but like I think there's a theme that you're sort of communicating with that I think is very enriching, to understanding people's struggles with these things, and how these conversations happen online, is because we withdraw so much from the rest of the world that we don't really get a chance to have to confront the idea that maybe we have this condition, or maybe that there's these conditions outside that are problems. um
Or even that we don't have enough feedback. We don't have enough
yeah,
external sort of information sources or reaction, possible areas of reaction and interaction to learn that about yourself. 100%. Yeah, totally.
yeah. And like, everybody's like, well, you're so normal though, like, oh, Noah's super chill, like I can't believe he would have. But you were doing that, like you were able to do that because, and everybody does to a degree, but like you were just able to meet the expectation, like that was a success for you. But it's ironic because it's not really successful in the way like, oh wow, what a great thing. It's just like, it's almost like every day is like this challenge to like solve a puzzle and then get out. So that, and if you solve the puzzle, then everybody leaves you alone and nobody thinks that you're weird or a problem. And then one day, if that puzzle doesn't get solved, you kind of have an issue. Or if, eventually, like, people, you get out of school and you get into more withdrawn environments and you start seeing yourself a lot more, and confronting things a lot more, because there's nobody externally like that's able to tell you, like, I'm kind of rambling too, but like I think part of why I bring that up is because when you mentioned like, well, with my condition, like I never felt like I had it like that as bad as like some other people do, and like feeling like, you're not, you don't have like the violent episodes and your background, or like you don't have, I think you also, like, the way you talk about gender has like a similar thing too, and this is a thing that you tackle a lot with masculinity, where it's like you do the genders pretty well, right? Like you gender well, and like you meet that expectation well, but then also internally, that there's these contradictions, or you feel it or you sense it. But as you're growing up, the only thing that you're really able to the only thing that you're really focused on is just meeting the criteria, so that people leave you alone, versus like actually thinking it works for you, you know?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, all of that, 1,000%. I feel all of that what you were saying, and um, it's interesting because when I reflect, or like when I've thought back to that feeling of like being at school and kind of putting on that sort of, um, or just subconsciously learning how to act to fit that standard. Um, I haven't thought about that in a while, but when I have thought about it, it's felt like almost, what's the word, like disingenuous,
Mm,
like it's not like I'm faking something, as
right.
opposed to it being a learned response and a learned behavior, and a learned not just from like interactions, but from like just media culture, whatever
Yeah.
dictates how I view what you're supposed to look like as a normal person. um and that's kind of liberating to think about it that way, because then it takes more of the pressure off of you just being like a weirdo that's hiding who they really are, and more so
Right.
like, oh, this is just how anyone would cope in that same situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, specifically with like bringing up online people, like I think that's what, like, all of the friends that I've met from the internet are like some of the best people I know, because we all kind of have the same disposition. um and it's kind of like a sorting filter to end up where we end up online, because that requires a lot of isolated time, and time spent with yourself, and time spent like just, yeah, I don't know. I love everybody I've ever met from like Twitter or wherever, because it's usually there's a lot of similar trends to like the types of dispositions and things. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, it's like you go through this weird like journey, and you don't know where the hell you're going, or where you end up, and then all of a sudden you end up in this room with a bunch of people that are like, you too, like like, is this also a problem? Like, oh my god, I had the same problem.
yeah,
um and so that, in that way, there's a beautiful thing that happens online. Like, it can be tough to see people being so critical of it, because we have these experiences on the other hand where we have everything so validated for us, and so and we really build a stronger understanding and healthier relationship with ourselves through doing this. And it's not just like we were here like for clout, right? Like it wasn't just like, oh well, I'm making up that I have this disorder, or I have this disorder now I'm going to exaggerate it so that people give me points, right?
Yeah.
It's a very cynical way of looking at it. um so I guess I'll close on one more question.
Mhm.
I think I think that that conversation about like attention is really fascinating. People are really, it's like one of the biggest, the most common criticisms anybody ever gives anybody online is like, you're doing this for attention. And they say there's something called the law of the mirror, of like, you criticize and hate the most in other people what you see in yourself, kind of thing. I think, and I wonder if people are so focused and so aghast at like this idea of people seeking attention because everybody has that insecurity that they're also seeking attention. So for you, I guess I'll do a two. I think there's a two-part question. I'll cheat, but what have you noticed about? I don't know if you've seen other like bipolar creators or like other TikTok trends or things like that about bipolar disorder. But what do you notice sort of about those communities and the attention that's given to those sort of trends and content? And secondly, like, what do you feel, what's your relationship to attention? How do you sort that feeling or that potential insecurity that you mentioned also as well, of like, i I might, I fear that I'm doing this for attention, I fear that I'm making this up. um yeah.
So to the first one, now that you mentioned, I literally have, I don't think really ever watched content from bipolar people, or like looked at bipolar communities, and I'm gonna do that because that I don't know why I haven't done that, but that I'd be interested to learn
You should make a
about.
video about it if
Yeah,
you find
yeah,
something
deep
weird.
dive. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. That's a great idea. I'll credit you for the inspiration. I think like the to the second part about attention. I mean, yeah, like I remember being someone who's on the internet kind of early, and not early, but like younger, comparatively to I guess my parents or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
Attention obviously is something that psychologically I value, and um, I remember in like 2017, I my internet presence was like I was doing comedy sketches on Twitter,
Hmm.
and when they would go viral, I would like feel so validated, like nothing, like that kind of contributed to mania at points because I was like, I am the greatest person alive because my Twitter sketch got 100 retweets. I'm the smartest SNL bound guy. Like it was just really not the most healthy. Over the years of just spending time on the internet and also like forming connections with people as opposed to just like posting. Um, I think you kind of learn to mediate that desire for attention. Um, but I'm sure there's still a part of me that is sort of critical of that behavior because it's something I used to partake in and still in some ways actively partake in because learn it like that's what we have to do. YouTube is just like looking at a bunch of numbers to decide how we can figure out to drive the most attention out of
Yeah.
people. It's like a really fucked up, like sick experiment of of the ego, but um also in terms of like the actual value I derive from it, I feel like it's much less serious, and there's much other things that I can tether my sort of life to. But yeah, I am really interested to learn about those communities because just to see what other people's experiences of it, because I know obviously it's a huge variance, and I know um, there's probably a lot of great stuff going on, um, but yeah, that's a great question to end on.
I mean, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a great conversation. I feel like, as usual, there's like a million other things. Like it's always so many tangents and questions to go on with these with any of these conversations. So
Mhm.
I'm really fascinated to see further work from you on whatever you want to choose to do. But thank you for talking to me. Hopefully, I'll let you know what goes on with this conversation, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully everything records okay and everything. But it was really enlightening. Yeah.
Yeah, that felt like therapeutic, to be honest. I haven't had like
Oh,
a interview that was like really that was awesome. So thanks so
oh,
much for chatting with me for sure.
yeah, it was therapeutic for me too. It meant a lot. Awesome. Well, thanks, Noah. Have a good
Yeah,
one, okay?
take it easy. Talk soon.